We don't use a germ chamber, though I think it's ideal. If you have a germ chamber, it can regulate temperature and humidity. You're going to give yourself your best chance for germination success. We take special precaution when it gets hot out. When in the wintertime, when there's not a lot of ventilation, we're able to keep humidity, around the seed, so germination isn't too hard to control. When we get hot temperatures in the greenhouse and we're venting a lot and the humidity is dropping, we'll wrap the cart to improve germination there. So if it gets really hot, we'll move them out of the greenhouse and we'll move them into our warehouse just to get them out of the sun, and that also improves germination. We don't distinguish whether it's baby leaf lettuce or head lettuce. Our process is the same for germination.
So you made a couple comments there that I'd like to target a bit, and I know that Rob and Dave would pipe in too. This whole lettuce cultivation as a whole, from a commercial greenhouse perspective back, there's been vertical farms, there are vertical concepts, then there's also different ways of propagating and cultivating inside of a greenhouse in general. And then the comparisons are still up and coming. I know John and we talked a bit about it there, like this market's evolving still, but from what you're seeing and what we see now, there seems to be some pretty, a little bit of vigor behind doing the germination concept vertically and having more of that chamber that John had brought up. And I'll pass over to either Dave or Rob to talk about a germination chamber in general, because they do this all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
so one of the comments that John had brought up at our meeting last week, which I find kind of plays in right now, is economies of scale. John, you started off as a smaller facility. You've added on a number of times. You hope to add on more. Some of those things are just, you can't afford to put in a germination chamber and all of that other equipment on a small scale, but there is a level where that starts to make sense. You had mentioned that, should you build the next phase, that's one of the things that you're looking to add into this project. So maybe you can just discuss that a little bit, how you evolved through your process and where you see it going.
Yeah, evolve. Yeah, so when I started out, it was a little 300 square foot greenhouse, plastic, double poly, leaning off the side of a barn with, everything I had. I found at Home Depot. Back then we were using, seat mats that had heaters in it. So way different than we are today. Now we use, we went to where we would put them right out in the greenhouse after we seeded them. We learned that, a couple days before you get those first two leaves to pop are important. So we went to a racking type system where we could move them around easily. But in the end, if you can control the humidity, you want it as high as possible, and you can control the temperature and the light, being dark, that's what you want. Building a germ chamber is not cheap. So there's a scale where that makes sense. We're going to hit that. We probably could have done it already and it made sense. But the bottom line is you're going to have your best chance of success when you start out with a good young plant. If you get germination, we're 99.5% or better germination here for what we do. So it's certainly acceptable. But, if you get germ rates in the 70s or 80s or whatever it is low, you're wasting time, you're wasting space, you're wasting money. So there's a value in it just there, just in increasing the germination and not wasting your time and money. We're definitely going that route. We need to automate our whole germination process, and as it moves to propagation and transplanting and everything else. So again, I agree with Rob that scale makes sense. We're going to be going into the 3 to 4 acre range, and I think at that size it makes sense for us.
Guys, could you we have a question. Can you guys just give a quick description of what a germ chamber is? And
yeah, I can take that one. A germination chamber is just going to be an insulated room where you can keep the temperature and humidity exactly where you want it for that, anywhere from 2 to 5 days while the seeds germinate. And I mean, it can be automated. It can be as simple as, almost just cooler panel with, a heater and a humidifier in there, or it could be, something a lot more with a moving table system where, you're moving plants in and out automatically. So then they're going out to the greenhouse just without even touching them, right? Just depends on what level of automation you're comfortable with. And like John said, how far along you are in your overall processes that you feel you might need it, right? And actually, I got a quick question for you too then, John. For this if you were going to a germ chamber, would this be more of a labor savings, or would it be more of a you're trying to hit like a 95 or I don't know 98%, 99% germ rate?
Well, we're there. I mean, we're there. Our processes, the seeds that we use, we work really closely with the breeders. Making sure the seeds are in date. So we're already in the 99% plus range. But for us, it's space, it's automation, it's handling. We're just finding, more efficient ways to manage space. A vertical chamber for germination and probably for propagation makes a lot of sense, because that CapEx that you spend there is well spent. I'm not a big believer in going vertical on the finished phase of stuff. It's certainly in our greenhouse, it doesn't make sense. So that answers your question.
Okay.
You said something about it. I've heard it a couple of times, but I've never really learned it personally. But what's the difference between a coated and uncoated or naked seed?
Well, the seed suppliers can put coatings on seeds and things to protect the seed. A naked seed is really hard to handle. It's like gunpowder, right? So we use drum seeders with that use suction to pick up the seed. So having that pelleted seed, it's easier to handle. It picks up real nice, and it provides that kind of barrier around the seed. Get it moist. The seed's got a kind of nice little microclimate to get started in. So we rarely use non-pelleted seed for those reasons.
And on the drum seeders, are you seeing that seeding process is 100%? That it's picking up a seed every time and placing it every time in the right spot?
The drum seeder is, as long as it's clean, I don't want to say 100, nothing's 100%, Rob, as we know, but it's pretty darn close. It's a great machine. It's an Urbanati machine that we actually bought from AdeptAg, but the problem can be inconsistencies with the media. Like if your media isn't perfectly punched and the holes aren't right in the middle of the tray, which it happens sometimes, there's deviations in any manufacturing process. So, if that's not perfect or the tray's not perfect on the conveyor belt, you can miss it by a little bit, and maybe you have a little bit of what we call fixing to do. But easily manageable for one person who's running a seeding line to sit there and manage the quality control and make sure there's a seed in every hole. I mean, that's a big deal for us. If you don't have a seed in the hole, then you don't have a chance for success. So making sure it's in the hole isn't automatic. You got to have somebody that double checks that.
And when you are seeding, are you overseeding intentionally for that fixing process?
So we don't. Yes, we really got to take a deep look at what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. There's two ways that I know of that greenhouses operate. You direct drill seed, where you're seeding right into the channel. We use a mobile gully system. So whether you're seeding directly into the board in a pond system or directly in the channel, when you do that, a couple things happen. One, you eliminate the labor involved with transplanting, right? You're growing a baby plant, and then you have to physically pull it out of the tray, whether by a robot or by hand, and you got to put it in the channel. So that's the bad part. The good part about doing a two-step process is you get a chance to, if you put a seed in the channel and it doesn't grow, we've just wasted that space, and you're never going to get a chance to go back and fix that. So you're immediately losing efficiency there. When you do it the way we do it, where you're doing a two-step process and you're transplanting, one, you get to manage your space, right? You're growing a seed in an area that's maybe, I'm going to call it 2 inches by 2 inches wide, and it stays there for 14 or 18 days. So you're managing that space. That average space for the first 18 or 14 days is very small. And then when we transplant into the gully system, first you get the chance to cull out any plants that, one, didn't germinate, or two, didn't germinate well. And if you transplant 100% perfect plants, as far as whatever your quality is, you've got a really, really good chance at having 100% yield from that trough on the other end. If you don't have that chance to cull things out of quality control, then you're never going to get 100%. So I like the system where you're transplanting for two reasons. One, it manages space better, and two, it gives you an opportunity to quality check the baby plants. If you start with a good baby plant, you've got a real good chance of success.
Well, that actually brings up a really good question then too. So, in your experience, when you start, because because we've seen a lot of like direct seed gutters where, you know, you're seeding into the gutter and it goes out to the greenhouse. And you, like you said, you don't really have any control after that. But, you know, what is the plus minus on that head of lettuce from a weak seeded or a weak germ to a really strong germ? Are we looking at like, you know, 20%, 30% more yield off of that one plant?
Oh, it can be significant. I mean, obviously the worst case scenario is 0, right? You put a seed in there, it doesn't germinate, so you get no yield for that, whatever the space is, square inches, whatever it is. It varies. I mean, you can see deformities in plants. You know, there's all kinds of different theories on why it happens. You know, sometimes it happens in batches. If you see, you're not gonna see that until probably 13, 14, 15 days in, a variation or some kind of deviation in the plant. So in that case, you know, you'd be talking about 50% yield difference, right? But a strong plant, yeah, it's hard to put a number on it, but it varies. But anything that's not 100% is affecting your yield. And if you want to be profitable in this business, every plant that comes off that line's got to be sold. You can't be throwing stuff out or say, oh, that one didn't grow real well, don't worry about it. It all adds up, and it adds up big time.
Yeah, like it brings to you, like it brings that consistency. Right now, you're talking commercial, you're talking scale, right? So if, like John said there a minute ago, if there are deficiencies or there are issues with some of the plants, the end product, you're going to have the highs and the lows. The thing about the industry that like I've been in this industry now for about 13 years, and I started in the vegetable market, and what took me by complete surprise is how you could do so many plants, start with so many hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of plants. And as it evolves on this large facilities or larger facilities that you see, there's just consistency. All the plants are the same because they get the same amount of water, same amount of light. Like it's a part of this whole process. With lettuce, you really got to be conscious of, because I've spent the last 2 years roughly focusing heavily on lettuce. And I've been to facilities that kind of we're referencing here where you have the actual gutters of the gully systems. It's filled with some sort of a peat soil, cocoa mix. And then they will drop seeds directly inside that gutter. And they'll take it to a germination process. Not having that touch the germination process is a huge part of this conversation. And as John's saying it, he's seeing it as much as he is because he's physically doing the germinating and physically seeing when he transplants to pick the plants. But I've been in facilities where there's an 80% success rate, for example. So now you have some seeds that took, some seeds that didn't, and you have a bunch of inconsistencies on a gutter by gutter basis. So when you come to harvest, when it comes to the quality, when it comes to the output, you're having highs and lows. That's such a big point that he made about starting it off and having that touch and being sure that germination is really taken into consideration severely and thought through well. So it's nice to hear. It kind of solidifies everything we talk about.
Yeah, and if you look at any of the major propagators out there too, I mean, you know, there is always that second touch, right? If you're talking about a tomato, cucumber, pepper, whatever it is, you've always got that second touch. Now, it's probably more to do with space. But at the same time, yeah, you'll always have somebody looking at it before it goes out to the greenhouse. So, yeah, I agree. Then that doesn't make sense. You wouldn't do that, I suppose, right?
That's a big part of this industry. Like from a propagator perspective, good point, Dave. Because we can buy plants. You can buy plants that are pre-made and they're ready to be transplanted, ready to be put into their final place in the greenhouse. From a lettuce perspective, I know like in other markets, specifically in Europe, you can buy propagated lettuce. Like you can actually get plants from a propagator. John, would you do that here? Would you roll those dice, or do you need to have that touch as a man that actually produces, cultivates, and then sells as well?
I'd love to be a lettuce seedling maker.
Yeah.
That'd be the easiest job in the world. If the market's not here yet, it's going to happen someday. As we get bigger, you know, in Europe, you're seeing a very, you know, a large young plant. You know, they're grown in special facilities. They're grown in peat blocks. You know, then that space is not I hate to use the term wasted, but the finished grower doesn't use his space for the young plants, right? He's saying my capital is more well spent on my finished systems, whether it be a pond system or a gutter system. And this guy over here really knows what he's doing, and he's going to give you 100% perfect baby plants. I mean, if you're in the flower business and if you've ever bought, like we used to buy from Express Seed over here in Overland, you get a plug tray from them, it's perfect. Right? There's a robot that went through and culled it out and made sure it's perfect. You're going to have a really hard time doing that for yourself on a smaller scale. So I would love to see, you know, as the market evolves, have somebody who specializes in growing young plants. You know,
I think the difference.
the other piece is the variety. Like we grow certain varieties that, like, I wouldn't tell you what they are, because they're important. That's important to me, right? So that can have something to do with it too. But I would love to be a lettuce germinator.
But I think the difference between lettuce and the other crops is that, typically a tomato, pepper is a once a year propagation.
Yeah.
Cucumbers maybe 3 or 4 times a year propagation, but lettuce is, at worst weekly, at best daily, that they're propagating and seeding. So it's a constant thing. And so to have that in-house is fairly critical, I believe.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at the whole process too, like, again, sorry, John, I'm going to keep asking you questions because you're kind
Okay.
of yeah. But I mean, like, if there's a vision system or something like that, like, I mean, as somebody who does this day in, day out, I mean, do you look at that as, okay, look, we can get rid of 1 to 2 people on the line, or is that person's knowledge that's working that line? Is that person's knowledge going to be better, do you think, than any computer that you're going to look at? Or if the technology got there, that'd be something that, you look at?
Technology's here. Yeah, when we do our next expansion, we'll have a full vision system, transplanter, everything. It doesn't have to be a person. It's pretty amazing, right? Of the vision could say, I want, there's different levels of cameras nowadays, right? Yeah. So if you want to spend the money and you're willing to, if you can see the benefit, the bigger you are, the more it makes sense to spend the money, right? Like right now, it doesn't really make sense. We're doing 10 million plants a year. Maybe it's going to save 2 people. There's a payback. You can calculate it. It's going to save me 2 people 30 hours a week, and there's a dollar amount, right? The bigger you get, the more sense it makes. So yeah, we're again approaching the scale where these investments make sense.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, as well too, like, I don't think anybody's really done an introduction here, but I mean, you've been doing lettuce probably longer than anybody else out in the industry. And I mean, like we said too, like you've seen it all the way up. Like, I mean, you've lived through all these issues. And if you're saying, yeah, if it makes sense at a certain size, great. But at your current size right now, how big are you exactly?
Yeah, so our growable space is around 115,000 square feet, and then we've got a bunch of warehouses and coolers and all that other stuff. So pretty much all of our infrastructure has been built for a 10-acre facility. So when I built the place, I didn't think about it as becoming a 10-acre business. I didn't never think it would become that. Now I could see it. Now I need to go think about building another one someday, I think, and I would love to start over. But there's no playbook. Like certainly wasn't a playbook 13 years ago when I started. I got into it about the same time as you, Tony. But there was no playbook. There was no, this is what you do. And I still don't think that's out there. You got to figure out what works for you. You got to figure out what works for your system, what works for your climate. Are you a vertical farm? Are you a greenhouse? And you got to figure out what works for you. So that's, there's no miracles in the world. If anybody thinks you're just going to go plop in a $50 million greenhouse and kill it, you're crazy. You're gonna take your lumps. You're gonna have to learn, and it just takes time. And to me, to go out there and spend millions and millions and millions of dollars, if you really, really don't know what you're doing, you're set yourself up for failure. There's nothing wrong with starting small and kind of getting your feet wet and figuring it out.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point there too. I mean, when you're talking about the size of the facility and the amount of money that can go into this, I mean, but in your opinion too, and this, I know we were really talking about germination here, but in your opinion, how important is your grower compared to all the other things inside the greenhouse?
It's so important, so I didn't go to school for growing. I went to school for business finance. I worked at Merrill Lynch and hated it, right? I'm like, I'm out of here. So that wasn't my expertise, but I told myself I'm going to learn how to grow because it's the most important thing. And if you don't know what you're doing, say you have a grower and he gets mad and he leaves and you don't know how to grow, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So the fact that I made it as far as I did without hiring a world-class grower is pretty shocking to me that we made it as far as we did. But like Priva and environmental control systems are the difference, right? That is the biggest thing in a greenhouse that makes this possible. When I started, we didn't have Priva. I was doing everything by hand, opening the vents, mixing the fertilizer, doing the pH testing. And, that's not the way to do it. But you can have all this great stuff, these bells and whistles like Priva, but if you don't have somebody that knows how to use it, it doesn't matter. So you got to have these systems, the tools that a world-class grower needs, and then you need the world-class grower. One without the other doesn't work. They're not mutually exclusive. You got to have both.
Of course.
So you do have a world-class grower. We've met him. He's a very, very nice gentleman. Does having that equipment help attract that type of grower?
I mean, Renato Zardo is my grower. He's worked in 50-acre tomato ranges. He's worked as a consultant. He was my consultant. And when I saw what he was capable of, I said, you're working for me full time. And his wife too. His wife's just as incredible as he is. So a guy like that, he's going to want to have those tools. It's as a very special person that's a grower, you have to have this level of conscientiousness that's abnormal. You've got to be really smart. You got to feel the plant. You've got to have this. There's a certain way about these people. If he doesn't have those type of tools at his disposal, he's not. I don't think he would be interested. I mean, he needs those things. He's always pushing the envelope, and you can't do that without some of the technology that's available today.
Did he drive you towards any technologies?
We're always adding stuff, and we work with the vendors, the lighting companies, breeders. We're working on forward stuff with them that they haven't even figured out. So that's what he drives. He's driving the constant push. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, photosynthesis in the greenhouse is a few things. It's light, it's fertility, it's air movement, it's humidity. And when all those things are in perfect balance, that's when you get like maximum yield, right? If one is a little out of whack, then it's not perfect, right? The yields aren't there. So his goal is to make everything in balance all the time. And that is challenging in a greenhouse. Maybe in a vertical farm, I don't even know. I've never run a vertical farm. But when you have, like today, it's 65 and cloudy. Tomorrow, it's going to be 30 and snowy. Like, good luck managing that every day without tools. So he drives it. He's constantly driving to bring it all together, Rob.
Okay, so before we keep going, because we are deflecting a bit, we got a bunch of people online that probably want to talk about germination a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Let me ask a few questions here. So one is, are any of your operations, or I would guess for some of you, have you come across any operations that are nutrient or biologically priming seed before seeding?
What was the end of that?
Question?
It's they're asking, have you come across an operation, or I assume as Great Lakes growers, nutrient or biologically priming seeding before you plant, I would assume.
Well, I think that's that coating though, right? Like, I mean, that does have a certain level of, getting the seed ready to plant at that point.
I wonder, are they asking if you start with the plug, you add the plug is saturated, and then are they asking if we do maybe a treatment before it goes into the germination process, or before we actually wrap it and not touch it for a couple days? Like, do you give it a mist from above?
Well, I'll say a couple things. One, the seed coating, it's really a question for the seed companies. What exactly is in that coating, and does that answer her question? Is that prime seed? I think there's different things they can put on seeds that'll help protect it from disease and things like that. But so not necessarily do we do that. I would say no. We're taking the seed, we put it in the substrate, and then we're I would say priming it, or we're flooding it with low EC water. So it's got a small amount of the full broad range of fertilizer, but a very low rate of fertilizer. Soak the seed so it's got that moisture to germinate and pop those first two seeds.
And then you put it into a chamber, and then can we talk maybe light levels in that chamber? And we obviously said from a humidity perspective, the higher the better, right? But what would you say from a light level perspective from the germinations or for germination?
Well, yeah, we don't, again, we're germinating on a cart. We seed it, we water the tray in, we put it on the cart, we wrap the cart with plastic to keep the humidity in. And if the temperature is right, we just leave it in the greenhouse. So in that context, it's following the same light patterns as, whatever the outside is, the ambient, and also, the lights are, running in the greenhouse. So.
Well, and I think it's a good point you brought up about your water quality. You're doing a very low EC. I understand that you do have an RO system that you do blend slightly with your well water, but the purpose of that was to get your EC down low enough that you're not creating a nutrient imbalance on the seeding process. Is that correct?
We use straight RO water. I love the pH, the buffering capacity of the water isn't ideal, but we're starting with 0 EC. So we're adding in exactly what we want. If we just used our well water, we would already be starting with, I mean, we can't even just use our well water. We have so much iron in it. So we like start from 0 to take that EC down to 0, and then we'll build it up to maybe 0.75 or 0.8, EC levels for the nutrient solution for the young plants.
But even in the propagation stage, the water quality is a key factor.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're in the business of hydroponics. It's all about water.
Yeah, speaking of irrigation, we've got a question on that. Do you find yourself running into physiological issues transitioning from germination boxes to your true climate/young plant irrigation? And if so, how do you go about troubleshooting these issues?
Mr. Bonner, remember we were talking about at your farm, and we're talking about the process of going from the germination to some sort of a nursery, and we were kind of debating a bit about the acclimation and, what does that plant shock look like? Would you say, and this is just me saying it out loud, I guess, from a germination to propagation in a chamber, that step is pretty vital, specifically because that plant's getting ready to go into a greenhouse, and that environment won't be as controlled as it would be in a chamber. And I think we went back and forth about that. And the general here, we got a lot of guys on the call. What would you say about that process?
Well, I mean, it's important. I mean, you're taking a plant that's been just pretty well protected, and you're throwing it to the wolves, right? You're kicking out of the nest, so to speak. So it's important, making sure it's irrigated properly. You don't want to let it dry out a day after you bring it in the greenhouse. I think that's a very important part. But the biggest thing is just making sure that you treated it right the first couple of days, get those first 2 leaves out, and then once it's out of the greenhouse, just maintaining it.
And so if you were to have a germination chamber and then brought it out, do you think there'd be more of a culture shock than having the process where you're actually doing your process in the greenhouse right now?
I don't know, because I really haven't done it. Like I've been doing this for 10 plus years. So I could tell you all about it. It works. We did some testing doing like a chamber for germination. We grew the young plant in like a vertical farm environment and then brought it out. Much softer. The plant is much softer. It doesn't get the breeze and the light and everything going on it. So I can't really answer your question, Rob, from germination to propagation. But from propagation, finishing the plant in a vertical type setting and then bringing it out into the greenhouse, for instance, the reds aren't red, they're green, right? And because they weren't getting that part of the light spectrum that make them red. One day after you bring them out in the greenhouse, they turn red. It's pretty crazy. So I don't really have a lot of experience on that, Rob, so I don't want to answer about my paper.
Fair enough.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of it, like from the people that people we've worked with and companies we've looked at and seen. It seems like that germination chamber concept is what's prevailing. So starting that plant, cracking that seed, 2 to 5 days, variety dependent, and then bringing it out to the greenhouse in some sort of a propagation setting, but with the natural sunlight, with the actual irrigation as needed, but a higher density. And then obviously when that plant needs that space, the second transplant, to give it its space to grow in the final resting place. But that's like we always say, right? It's everything's in its infancy still, and there's a lot of different concepts that are being put forward. And it really is, touch, feel, and what's specific to you and where you're located.
Yeah, I would add one other thing to that, Rob. Probably the most important thing is the timing, right? If you take it out too early and you put a plant in an environment and the sun's hitting it and it's hot out and you can't control the humidity, your germ's going to not be good. You jump the gun, right? You pulled it out too fast. If you wait too long and the plant stretches, you can never get that back. As soon as that thing stretches a half an inch, you might as well forget about it, right? Because you're going to put it in the greenhouse, it's going to stretch, it's going to neck down the base of the plant, and it's going to give you headaches. You got a good chance of having tip burn. You got all kinds of issues that are going to come down the road. So you can screw up a crop really big by keeping it in too long. and not long enough. So, and varieties are different. Some varieties take 2 days, like you said, Tony. Some take 5 days. So you got to keep that in mind too. You can't just shove everything into a germ chamber and think it's all going to be the same and pull it out. You got to be able to pull out what you want when you need to. So,
John, a couple questions here for you on the lighting. So, one is what type of lighting are you using that's been working for you, and then what light spectrum turns lettuce red?
Yeah, we use LEDs, not necessarily in germination, because again, we're not at the germ chamber stage. We're putting the trays on the shelves on a cart, leaving them in the greenhouse wrapped. The blue light's what gives you the nice deep reds. Our LEDs are 80% red, 20% blue. So we've done some testing on that. Different wavelengths of light will give you different results on the finished product. It's not simple in the greenhouse because we've got red sprinkled in everywhere. So we don't just grow red things for the market. So we just kind of stick with an 80-20 LED, and that works good for us. Red to blue.
And it's actually a pretty good question too, because I have seen germination chambers go both ways, right? Like I've seen it's just completely dark, hot, humid, and that's how you germ. But then I've also seen other ones now too that, as the plant moves through the system automatically, you're going to get light. You're going to get a little bit of a cooler and more air-driven area for that plant as well too. I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering, I guess, how much benefit there is to that. I mean, if you had it in your greenhouse, John, I mean, if you looked at, say, a more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is here. Like, I mean, I know like floral growers, they'll do a hardening off process. Is that you're almost doing that just out in the greenhouse? Like, I mean, if there's a more controlled way to do that, does that add any benefit to it?
I don't know. Don't have an answer to that. I really don't know.
I know.
Again, it's Tony, we were talking about this. Like, there's no playbook. Like, we're all learning this. So that's why part of the reason I'm on here today is because I think it's okay to share and talk about what you're doing. Like, nobody's got the secret sauce, everybody. Like, I don't care who you are. Like, we all need to learn a little bit. And listen, the whole thing has come a long way in 10 years, but we can learn a lot from the flower guys. Those guys have been germinating, seeds for, whatever, decades. There's a lot to learn. So, we don't know everything, and I certainly don't have the answer for that, Dave.
Well, yeah, there's a fine line from like, hey, trying it yourself, touching it yourself. Don't just follow what everybody's saying, what everybody's doing. Like, it's a constant thing with vegetable production as well. We see new lighting weekly, new spectrums, new conversations around being able to dim or adding and customizing spectrum. And you're getting all these extra tools, but it's not getting vetted to the point where, okay, how does this benefit my specific farm, my specific crop, and to John's point, my specific variety? Like, that's the biggest takeaway here. Who's your market? Who's your customer? Who's your offtake? Where are you going to send that finished product? And then working around that and getting it as good as you can, right? And then, the man's patient. Like, 13 years in this industry, right? And doing these things and trying these things. Like, I had a great time at this guy's place. So yeah, take that away from it all, right? Just don't listen and be told. Try.
Well, and I think John had a great point in our visit too, that what works for him in Ohio wouldn't work in North Carolina or Texas or California. Everything is also, climate dependent on where you are and even what your markets are, because the market that he's selling to here might not be the same market they have in Arizona. There's just so many different factors that it's really hard to say this is the playbook.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maximize your free inputs. If you're in an area where there's sun, maximize that sun. Be conscious of what you're using for a covering perspective in the greenhouse. Think about your shading, worry about your climate, and try and make this place as comfortable as it can be for the plant.
Yeah, like here, you don't need to we get some warm days in the summer. Okay. Our climate might hit the 90s, mid 90s for, some period of time, rarely more than a few days in a row. To go and put air conditioning in the entire facility for that is foolish, right? Curtains and a mist system work here. You go down to Georgia and you got to think totally differently. Texas, or even if you go farther south than that, you got to have a different facility with different capabilities. You got to use different varieties. It's totally different. So, you know, even Renato, our grower, he's advised people all over the country. It took him a good year here to really get settled in with what the environment was like, what it takes to grow, taking notes, what went wrong last May. All right, let's be proactive. You know, we had a huge, we're talking about germination. I'll tell you guys, last year, we had certain varieties that once the air temperature got above 90 degrees, the germination rate started dropping like a rock. So we had some days in July where we were approaching 88, and we've been up above 90, and we're bringing them out. Everything looks normal, and they're not germinating. So, and we had major problems because of that, because in the end, we're projecting for, I'm making numbers up, 1 million of these plants a week, and we're only getting 800,000 a week, and it's all sold. So on the other end, our customers calling up going, hey, why aren't you filling the orders? And it wasn't because we didn't do something right at the end. It's because we screwed up at the beginning. You know, so it's those type of things that you learn. If you don't learn those type of things, you'll be out of business.
Yeah, and I think that also brings up another good point too, is that, and Tony, you can attest to this, I'm sure. I mean, when a greenhouse is built and it does need cooling, say you're down in South Texas or something, where you're going to get those days of, you know, well over 100 somewhere out in Arizona, you're going to want to size that cooling properly. You're going to want to size all of that properly, because I mean, I don't know, during my time at Preva, I saw it time and again, you know, the cooling becomes a very expensive proposition. And, you know, people say, well, I can probably do it like this instead of going, you know, what everybody's recommending. And the problem is that never seems to work, right? It's either you can afford to do it or you can't, wherever you're trying to do it.
Yeah, it's completely specific to the area, to the location. Like, it's completely specific. And yes, it can be insane. And, you know, we can talk on a watts per square meter. You can put a lot of watts per square meter, or you can put what you need to put and be concerned about that 24-hour temperature. And one thing I did want to bring up, even though I know we're everywhere here, Janine, so I'm sorry, but when I was at with John, one of the takeaways was that the plant movement, air movement at the plant level, right? Just having that constant flow and that vigor that it brings to the plant itself. That's something that I've heard and seen and pushed at every conversation I've had with lettuce production, because it's been consistent everywhere I've heard and seen it. John, you want to elaborate a bit? Because I know we talked a bit about it. Just having that air at that plant level.
Yeah, it's important, but it's a factor of photosynthesis, right? You can put the gas pedal on one of the factors too much and cause problems. So it's balance, balance of your light levels, your humidity levels, your airflow. Maybe you don't, maybe you want zero airflow, or maybe you want to take that humidity at night up to 97% because you want to shut the plant down for 6 hours and let it rest. So having, again, back to tools, having the ability to control those type of things in the environment you're in is important. Going back to the germ chamber thing, like, I'm thinking to myself, if I built one of these in Georgia, I would have to have a germ chamber. Like, it wouldn't work. I wouldn't get away with what I get away with here. You know what I mean? It's just too hot, and most varieties would not perform well. So again, yeah, I think the airflow is critical. We're playing around with, we want to manage the airflow relative to all the other factors of photosynthesis. So airflow matters, but you can have too much and you can have not enough, and both of them cause problems.
Guys, kind of playing off that, I was looking at one of the questions here where they're asking, what's the optimal temperature range for lettuce germination? And, keep in mind, everywhere is different. Every greenhouse has it's kind of different microclimate. But are there different, what kind of environment do you shoot for with the lettuce? Just generally, as far as, your humidity, if you're fogging misting, or what are the priorities there to really get right, I guess?
I think it's a range, right? Like I'll take you back to last year when we were seeing these issues when it got really hot. Some varieties can take it 85 degrees and still germinate 98, 99%. Some of them, when they hit a certain level, it's just they're genetically disposed to not germinate well. So it depends on the variety. Your seed breeder can answer that better than me. Generally speaking, we take cover or take issue or take special notice when we get above 80 degrees. We start getting nervous when it gets above 80, get that plant out of the sun, get it in a warehouse, get it cool. Or if you're in a germ chamber, you probably keep that thing right at 68, 72 degrees. Most plants, seeds germinate quite well there.
How about you guys, germination chamber creation guys? What do you think?
Well, I don't usually make those decisions because, like John said, it's seed specific. So it's whatever the seed company is telling you want to have that at. I'm kind of curious, John, because there are a bunch of different types of germination chambers. We mentioned, there is the rack the cart and rack system, and there's the multi-level system. Have you looked at both of those, and do you have anything that you think stands out?
Yeah, so we've designed a system with AdeptAg where it can be both. So the first stroke is, hey, just roll carts in there, but it'll control the humidity, it'll control the temperature. But that racking, the table system and the lifting and all that stuff is pretty expensive, right? So the first thing is just getting it in there and getting the germination right. But as we get bigger, we want to handle 50 trays at a time. I don't want to be picking one tray up and working like that. I want to roll a table out of the germ chamber into my greenhouse, and I never touch any of it. And then it rolls over to my transplant machine. My robot automatically transplants it in the system. It moves through the greenhouse automatically, and then we harvest it automatically. So that's where we're going. My first step is going to be to build the chamber, stick with the cart system, and then see how that goes, make sure everything's how we want it, and then make the final investment to automate the table system in there.
So you answered my question with a hybrid of both. So
yeah, I mean, it's like I look at investment incrementally. Like I like to make an investment.
Oh, I think he lost power.
Frozen here. While we're waiting for him to come back, maybe I can ask a couple of questions about germination chambers that we have in the thing, see if you guys can address them. One is, let's see, what are the proper temperature and relative humidity needed? Let's see, what are the proper temperature and relative humidity needed to be in a germination chamber?
So they kind of touched on it a couple of times here, right? It literally is variety dependent, seed dependent, right? So you're going to have a way, you're basically, when you say germination chamber, just consider yourself a closed box.
Like, oh, there we go.
Yeah.
welcome back,
I
John.
was saying, like, when we were at your place, you mentioned it about 3 times how important it is to build for your location, to know what you're getting into. So I mean, like you said, it's very variety dependent on what that temperature humidity should be, but also knowing what those varieties want to build your germ chamber around what those are going to need for those times of year. I think is going to be critical. Right? Does your germ room need cooling? Yes or no? Am I somewhere where it's going to get way too hot even in an enclosed space?
I'm not sure we have John back yet.
Am I there?
He's there. Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
It's been one of those days here, guys. Yeah.
Windy, stormy day in Ohio.
Yeah, it's just windy out here today.
Yeah.
But like that takeaway should be like, if you can go with the germination chamber concept, or you heard from the man on the line now that you could basically have a tray and put seeds into a tray that has plugs on those in the trays and wrap it with a plastic wrap. So that way now you're limiting all of what's going out. You're keeping all the moisture within. You're keeping humidity in. It's economy of scale. It's return on investment, and it's obviously your output. Like, what is your planned output? What are you designing for? And then take that into consideration. Your labor has to be taken into consideration, and then that investment would obviously be something much easier to come to terms with and accept. Right. So it's specific to the facility and what you're going to do.
And what you have the money for, Not You know, everybody capitalizes their business different.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have a $1 billion investment company behind me. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Well, because that does bring up a good point too. You're not necessarily building all of your infrastructure for now. You're, like you said, I mean, you've got 10 years or 13 years into this now, and you built for that 10-acre facility, right? So if you did have the money, or you did have that $1 billion there, what would you have done differently from the beginning, do you think?
The first thing I would have thought harder about, it's apropos for what we're talking about. I would have thought about where are we going to put the germination area, where are we going to put the young plant area, and how is that going to interact and flow with the rest of the facility. I would go to the north side of my property. I would find a piece of property. I would go to the north side of the property. I would build a vertical. I would build a vertical type system, and I would make sure it was expandable and in ratio or in balance to what my final facility was going to look like. If it's going to be a 10-acre facility, I'm going to start with 1 acre. Then I'm going to build 10% or maybe 20% of my total germ area. But I have a plan in place that when this thing all gets built out, this is what it looks like. So what you need to do, you need to, I say it all the time, people they kind of overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in a decade. So you need to start with what is possible on your property and work backwards, and then find out where can I start? What do I have the money to do? And then go from there. I mean, that's where I messed up. I mean, we figured it out. Like we've moved stuff, but boy, it would have been a hell of a lot cheaper if I thought about it from the beginning.
Yeah. That's a constant conversation I have with a lot of customers, especially people that either inherit a facility or that are in the process of planning. It's future prep, right? So it's exactly what he's saying. And it's not a big cost for it up front. If you think about where you could be or what the plan is for the future, centralizing and having one spot for all your practices for the full acreage or the full facility is key. And like you said, expandable. But then if you're going to do it on an acre at a time, or 2 or 5 or 10 acres at a time, or however it may be, having pipes ran preliminarily, having manifold space, meaning like space for hot or cold water, just thinking of what's coming instead of having to reinvest in that facility or reinvest somewhere separately. Maybe you need another storage tank, or you need more silos, or you need more manifold capacity. Like, just, it's good to really plan out what you're thinking when it comes to those 10 years, that decade.
Yep.
I think that's good advice to end on. We have a few minutes for questions. Before that, while everybody's kind of getting in their final questions, I just wanted to circle back on a couple things at the beginning, because I don't think we were quite live yet. Next week, we'll be following up on this discussion on March 6th at 2 p.m. Same platform on Bright Talk. You can go to register. But the panel will be focusing on, more on the propagation and the young plant production. So same kind of discussion. Hope we can join us. So watch for that, and we'll get you, watch for the registration links on social media. And then also, AdeptAg and Prospiant are both going to be at Indoor EggCon. John, is Great Lakes Growers going to be there, or?
I'm going. Me and my wife are going.
So, yeah,
we don't have a booth, if that's what you mean. So I'll be seeing you guys there.
So you can watch for John on the trade show floor. AdeptAg will be in booth 312, and then Prospiant will be in booth 1301. So let's take a few questions here before we wrap up. Let's see, is lettuce germination affected by pH?
I don't know, but we make sure the pH is perfect. I can tell you that.
Well, do you do, I think we lost Rob here. Do you irrigate at all during the germination process? Like when you start it off?
We do. We're saturated. The media is pH balanced for one. Okay. Yeah. So we know that that's a known factor. And then the water that we're applying to it is we're monitoring that. We're regulating that. So we're putting pH water, media that's around 5.8 to 6, and the water is the same. And it's got a very dilute, broad-based nutrient solution in it.
You won't get a better answer than that.
Yeah. Let's see. Can the type of fertilizer help with turning those lettuce varieties that are bred to turn red, or is it only triggered by the blue light spectrum?
To my knowledge, fertilizer does not affect the pigment in the leaf. But My grower would probably be a better person to answer that than me. But the light spectrum definitely does. There's no question about it. Light's like the new frontier still. There's still so much to learn.
And we talk about UVB a lot as well and the effect of that,
Yep.
and not filtering that for the structure and getting it in on the plant level. That does help with the pigmentation as well.
Yeah, that's huge. That's a great point. That's a great technology that we adopted a few years ago. I mean, it's like I would never pour concrete without putting heated tubing in it, and I would never build a greenhouse without UVA, UVB coating.
Let's see. What do you use for a nitrogen fertilizer in a peat-based mix?
That's a specific one. I can't help with that.
Or is that
What was it? I didn't hear you there. Say it again.
What do you use for a nitrogen fertilizer in a peat-based mix?
Nope, not touching that one.
Sorry.
All right, we'll try another.
Again, you know those questions are really good. Like talking to someone, and I'm just making up companies' names, not advocating it, but talking to somebody at Berger or talking to somebody at Quick Plug, like those guys are going to be able to spit that right out to
Give you
you.
the specifics. All right. Let's see, one more. How can we ensure, I don't even know how to say this word, homogeneity across growth chamber to obtain homogeneity among the seedlings?
That's all going to be design right there. I think that's, it comes down to design and then a good computer system going behind that. I think, John, you mentioned it a couple times. I mean, with those systems in place, then yeah, you're going to be able to ensure temperature, humidity stay, at the temperature and humidity set points. But then also the germ chamber design has a huge part in that. Depends on where the air is coming from, how it's flowing across the plants, just the whole gambit. But that all comes down to just design. The better the design with, say, laminar airflow, good dispersion of misting nozzles, heating like a good solid, usually want like a hot water heat instead of an on-off heat is going to keep it a lot more, even across the entire crop. I think that those are the keys right there.
And then like was stated right in the beginning of this thing, your plug, your hole and plug, your placement of seed, that common start, and overseeding obviously so that you can have the extras in case, but that common start across the board, whether you automate it or not, it's going to make that all start. Like that's the beginning of it all. So as long as everything's applied uniformly after the fact, it should, in theory, come out all the same.
Yeah, like even when you're watering your plugs, right? Whether you're sub-irrigating or top irrigating over the plug. I mean, as long as you're getting the right amount of water and the same amount of water across all those plants. If you're hand watering, you may get some more, get some less, which is going to affect, again, the homogeneity, I guess, across all the plants.
Good word.
Yeah.
Good word.
We'll just
Yeah, because, how much you water plugs matters. Like and again, if you're doing it, you can do it with booms. I mean, when I started, I did everything by hand. We use booms now, but we also hand water. You get hot spots, you get edges that dry out. That's all matters. And it depends on the media. Like a peat-based media needs far less water than maybe some other medias. If you overwater it, you're just making a recipe for Pythium. So, yeah, you gotta and it matters different times of the year. Like summertime, you might water twice a day. Wintertime, you might water twice a week.
That media conversation is a whole other webinar.
No, it is. I mean,
honestly, the options are endless, really. Depending on if you want to make your own or buy them pre-made, or the type and the mixes and the rock wool, not rock. There's so many ways and differences there. You do your due diligence, make the right decision.
Yeah.
And it has such a big influence on everything else.
Where Rob go?
Yeah, I know.
I'm talking, I can see all of you. I don't know why my camera kicked out.
What happened right now, man? It's like this overpowering voice over us all. Thank you, Rob.
I'm still here.
Just really quick, because we only got a couple of minutes, but just, final thoughts. What's your best advice for growers in regards to germination? Just to wrap us up here.
Who wants to go first?
I'll just give you my 2 cents. You can spend $1 million, you can spend nothing, right? there's probably a good chance the better your equipment, the better to monitor, the more tools you have, the more successful you're going to be. But I can tell you right now, what we're doing every day doesn't take a lot of money. We're getting to the size where it gets prohibitive, where we need to spend the money, we need to handle things more automatically. So, and then lean on your vendors, lean on your seed breeders, lean on your media company, find out what they're doing. And, we're always collaborating with our vendors to try to get better. So
for me, it's scale. You contemplate your scale, contemplate what your output's going to look like, and try as much as you possibly can in your plan to minimize your inputs so that you have the least into that plan to get the most out at the end of the day.
Yeah, and really look at what your end goal is, right? I mean, I've been to really small places that, they don't really have the opportunity to expand after a certain point because you're basically going to be restarting over again, right? What is your end goal? And then plan for that before you even put a post in the ground.
Okay, great advice. Well, we want to thank John from Great Lakes Growers for being with us today, and Dave Taylor and Ron Vanderstein from AdeptAg, and then Tony from Prospiant for joining us, and all of our attendees. We hope that you can join us next week on March 6th, where we'll be talking more about lettuce and propagation and plant production. So thank you.
Thanks so much,
Have a great
John.
day.